All right. Good morning, everybody. Hold on. All right. Hey, all of a sudden something started playing on my phone. All right. Hey, good morning, everybody. It is Shabbat Shalom and Chag Purim Sameach. It is Purim, and it is the day of Erev Shabbat. And so, good morning to you all. And let me say good morning to you individually. Good morning to my mama. I love you, Mom. Good morning. I hope you're having a beautiful morning. Buenos dias to Elva. Good morning to you. And to Kelly Kenfield. Good morning to Kelly Woods and to Melody. Good morning to Jerry and Janet, and to Lori in Indianapolis, and good morning to Pat and Lori here, and to Rachel in Ohio. To we've got John and Wendy and Emma and Sutton. Good morning, you guys. And we've got Ellen and Richard with us this morning. Good morning, you guys. And Jim and Sarah and Nicole. Good morning to you as well, and good evening to Dayspring and Shabbat Shalom to Dayspring. You're making your challah and your hamantashen, so that's great. And good morning, afternoon to Pastor and Sister Martinez in Georgia, and good morning to Barbara Callahan and to Laura McGill. Good morning, Laura. It's good to have you with us this morning. And Kathleen, good morning, Kathleen, and Ron and Amy, and to Dee, good morning to you as well. All right. Well, today we're gonna just take a pause in the letter in Peter's first epistle, and because it's Purim, and we're gonna look at Purim. We're gonna look at the book of Esther. Traditionally you would read the whole scroll, the whole Megillah of Esther on Purim, and encourage you to do that with your family. We're not going to do that this morning. I mean, we're gonna cover this story, but we're not going to read it verse by verse. And of course, this is the nice thing this morning is that when I say, traditionally if I say Haman or Haman, everyone will boo, and if I say Esther or Hadassah, everyone will go, "Aw," and if I say Mordecai, everyone will go, "Yay!" Right? So, and I always have to pause for all that because of the noise and the interruption. So I have to pause this morning for that, and I don't have a grogger with me at the moment for when we say Haman, but we can really hit the story. And I really feel like this is it's always a timely story on one level. I mean, we celebrate it every year, and there's a reason we do, and there are things we're never to forget. Many of you are familiar with much about Purim, much about the book of Esther. But it's still one of the things that's so unique about this book is that it doesn't have the name of God anywhere in it. When you go through the entirety of the 10 chapters, the name of God is not there. And here you have Esther, and you have Mordecai, and you have Jewish community in exile. And so to me, the connection, even with, there are so many things that as I was going through this, that I connected with what I imagine that the exiles that Peter was talking to in 1 Peter, what they were facing, what they were having to deal with, and the instructions that Peter gives them about the way they're to carry themselves is, they're applicable to what you see being laid out pre-Yeshua on one level, but in Shushan, in Persia. So the time of the book of Esther, when we open it up, and I'll go back and forth here, but it says in the first verse, "This is what happened in the days of Ahasuerus." If in your Bible it says Xerxes, that's because the historian Herodotus wrote about the Persian Empire, and he used the Greek name Xerxes for Ahasuerus. So that's why that's translated that way. When Ahasuerus, I'm just going to read it from a distance, and I think I can avoid using the glasses, who reigned over 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia. At that time, King Ahasuerus sat on his royal throne in the castle in Shushan. Now, Shushan is in present-day Iran. It's in southern Iran, near Kuwait, near the Persian Gulf. And it says it was in the 3rd year of his reign. So the 3rd year of his reign would have been, according to Herodotus, this would have been, let me take a glance here, it would have been the year 483 BCE. So this is about 100 years after, a little more than 100 years after the exile had, after the destruction of Jerusalem, destruction of the temple. And of course, you'll remember when we went through the book of Jeremiah, the exiles had come in waves, right? So the exile, the initial group had come in 605, was Daniel, Azariah, Mishael, Hananiah, and they had been brought to Babylon. And then Jehoiakim was king, and then he ruled for 11 years. And in 598, 597, he was taken and he was killed. And then a few months later, his son, Jeconiah, the 18-year-old son, was then taken with thousands into Babylon, along with the court, the king's court. I mean, all the really important people, all the leaders in Jerusalem were taken to Babylon. And then 11 years after that, in 586 BCE, is when Zedekiah was killed, and the Jerusalem was overrun. The walls were destroyed. The temple was destroyed. And the reason that's important is what you've got is now they've been in exile, and now the 70 years has occurred, and many went back with Ezra and Nehemiah. Many went back to Jerusalem to rebuild, but many stayed in Babylon. And so this is what's happening here now is it's during the reign of the Medes and the Persians. And so that when King Darius came in, he was of the Medes and the Persians. Cyrus was Cyrus of Media. So you've got, that's the time period we're in, and so you've got people like Mordecai and Hadassah who have basically been in Babylon. In fact, if you'll read here, I'm going to just jump ahead to chapter 2, and I'll surmise what we've got in chapter 1. Though I think you know this story well. Well, I'll tell you real quick. In chapter 1, the king is having a big banquet. It's the 3rd year of his reign. He's having a big banquet. And they're drinking. There's an overflow of wine. And they're drunk and everything. And he and his queen Vashti is having a separate gathering with her ladies, a separate party with the ladies. And so in their drunkenness, he wants to have her come and parade her beauty before everyone, and she refuses. And he's furious and he's humiliated. And the other guys are also, his council, these guys are concerned too. They're like, boy, if word gets out, this is going to be really bad news for all the men in your kingdom, because now their wives are going to follow the lead of Vashti, and they're going to rebel against their husbands in the way that she has against you. So you got to do something about this, because this is going to make life for us very difficult. That's basically the thing. And so he deposes her, and they send out, they're going to get all the beautiful women from the kingdom to come and to be a part of the harem to see who could be potentially his queen. And so that's when we come into chapter 2. It says, after these things, when King Ahasuerus' anger subsided, he remembered Vashti and what had been done and what had been decreed against her. Oh, this is where the search goes out. Excuse me. Now this search goes out. Skip ahead to verse 5, Antonio. There was a Jewish man in the Shushan palace. So he's working in the palace in Shushan. So now you've had Jews that have spread away from even Babylon, from the city of Babylon. They obviously have been within the empire. And his name was Mordecai. Thank you, Antonio. He's going to go ahead and distract me all the way through, I guess, this morning. Mordecai, son of Yair, son of Shimei, son of Kish, a Benjamite, who had been taken into exile from Jerusalem with the captives that had been carried away with King Jeconiah of Judah, whom King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon had taken away. So the question is, who had been taken away? Is this Mordecai had come? Because if Mordecai had come with Jeconiah, then first of all, he would have come as a tiny baby, and he would be well over 100 years old. So it's unlikely that they're saying that Mordecai had come over. It's more likely that his grandfather had come over. So that's why it says Mordecai, son of Yair, son of Shimei, son of Kish, a Benjamite, who had been taken into exile. So that had been his great-grandfather. So anyway, they had come from in the exile. They had been part of, his family line would have been part of kind of the royal court. And so now he is one of generations that are growing up in exile, growing up away from the land of his fathers. And having grown to understand, to learn that it's not necessarily a safe place. And so it says here, verse 7, he had raised Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter. Aw, right, thank you, son. For she had neither father nor mother. The girl was attractive and had a beautiful figure. When her father and mother died, Mordecai took her to him as his own daughter. So he's an older cousin, who takes her in as his daughter. And in verse 10, skip down to verse 10, because now Esther is chosen. She's beautiful. She's chosen to be one of these women. And it tells us in verse 10 that Esther had not disclosed her people or her lineage, because Mordecai had commanded her not to make them known. So Mordecai had given her clear instructions to hide her lineage. He saw that she would be potentially in a vulnerable place. It doesn't give us the why. It doesn't tell us why. It doesn't condemn it, what he did. It just tells us this is the issue. You know, one of the things about this book, again, is though we don't see the name of God throughout the book, what we do see is the hand of God at work. In fact, the name of the book is Purim, which means lots, dice. It's like chance. It's just the roll of the dice. And what looks like the roll of the dice, what looks like just chance and happenstance, and you're in a place you don't want to be, and you're in a place where you feel you feel to such a endangered to such a degree that he's instructing her, do not let them know your lineage. Don't let them know where you come from. That you're saying, is God at work? Because here she's now being in the king's palace, intermarrying. She's not necessarily she's not walking in obedience to the instructions of the Lord. And so you have violation of Torah. Where is God in this? Has God abandoned his people? And what we see is that he has not. He has not. What seemed like coincidences, what seemed like Purim in one sense, the roll of the dice all through this story, is actually, we see the hand of God is at work, that even when it feels like God has abandoned us, that even for the folks that Peter is writing to, when it feels like God has abandoned you, that God has forgotten you, that you are here and he knows you, just as Peter was able to say, you're here by God, you're ordained to be here, chosen and foreknown by God, that you would be in this place, that God has not forgotten his people. And so we see that here. Verse 15. Skip down to verse 15. When the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Abihail, please stop, don't. It's distracting me, and I'm trying to go through in quick time. All right, I love you, son. When the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his daughter, to go to the king, She didn't ask for anything except what Haggai, the king's eunuch, the guardian of the women, advised. And Esther won favor in the eyes of all who saw her. Then Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus at his royal house in the 10th month, which is the month Tevet, in the 7th year of his reign. So we're now 4 years later. So now it started off, chapter 1 is in the 3rd year of his reign. This is now in the 7th year of his reign. So what you're talking about, too, is having to live in exile, in a place you don't want to be, in a situation where you feel suppressed or for a length of time. It's been 4 years since the beginning of this, and even longer for that. It's been a lifetime for Mordecai. Now the king loved Esther more than all the other women, and she won his grace and favor more than any of the other virgins. So he placed the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king gave a great banquet, Esther's banquet, for all his princes and servants. He proclaimed a holiday for the provinces and distributed gifts in keeping with the king's wealth. When the virgins were assembled a second time, Mordecai was sitting in the king's gate. Esther had not yet made known her lineage or her people, just as Mordecai had told her. So she has been obedient to his instruction, and that's how she had always been. In fact, it says, Esther continued to follow Mordecai's instructions as she had done when he was bringing her up. So she trusted his wisdom. She trusted his understanding. In those days, while Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bigthan and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs who guarded the doorway, became angry, and they conspired to assassinate King Ahasuerus. But Mordecai found out about the plot and told it to Queen Esther. Esther informed the king in Mordecai's name. And when the matter was investigated and found to be, they were both hanged on a gallows. And it was more likely, by the way, that the gallows is not as much of a gallows as they're impaled on a stake is more the picture of the way that they handled things. It was then written in the book of the Chronicles in the king's presence. So now this is one of those circumstances that seems coincidental. Mordecai just happens to be there when these guys are plotting that. He hears that. And now his cousin is the queen. And so he brings the information to her, and she brings it to the king in his name, and it's handled. And Mordecai it's written down in the Chronicles, but, she had a big banquet for her. Nothing's done for Mordecai. Nothing happens here, and he's not expecting it. He simply does what's right. He simply walks in faithfulness. He walks in obedience to the Lord, and walks in integrity, walks in honor and justice. That is the way that he handles himself. So sometime later, now we meet someone else. King Ahasuerus promoted Haman. Did they hear that? Did you hear him blow the harmonica? That's great. He doesn't get a harmonica song. He gets a boo. If you don't have you don't have a noisemaker. All right. So Haman was promoted. And Haman is the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite. So Haman is not a Mede or a Persian. He is an Agagite, which you'll remember Agag was the king of the Amalekites in 1 Samuel 15, that was spared by Saul when they were all supposed to have been destroyed. So this is the remnant of that which was supposed to be destroyed, and sticking around to try to destroy God's people. And it's a brief kind of a little bit of a picture of when we don't handle things in complete obedience the way the Lord has instructed us to, there are long-term consequences. And while the Lord may intervene as he does here to hold back those consequences, the issue is we should obey in the first place altogether. They wouldn't be in Babylon at all had the people walked in obedience to the Lord, right? I mean, they wouldn't have to be in this situation facing their own demise, their own annihilation, had there been obedience from the beginning. So anyway, this guy is elevated. He was elevated and sitting his chair above all the officials who were with him. All the king's servants were at the king's gate, bowed down and paid honor to Haman, for the king had commanded it. But Mordecai would not bow down or pay him honor. Then the king's servants who were at the king's gate said to Mordecai, "Why are you disobeying the king's command?" Day after day, they spoke to him. Day after day, they spoke to him, but he would not listen to them. Therefore, they told Haman in order to see whether Mordecai's resolve would prevail, for he had told them that he was a Jew. So here's the deal. Mordecai is in a situation where the king is commanded that he is to bow before Haman. But Mordecai is refusing that command because it's in contradiction to his faith, that he will not pay this homage to Haman. And he does, while he had told Esther not to reveal her lineage, he does now tell them the reason I do it is because of my faith, because I'm a Jew. I'm a Jew. That's why I won't. Because they're saying, why don't you do this? So now the information gets back to Haman. Oh, well, he doesn't do it because he's Jewish. So verse 5, when Haman saw that Mordecai was not bowing down or paying him honor, Haman was filled with rage. But it was repugnant in his eyes to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had told him the identity of Mordecai's people. So Haman sought to destroy all the Jews, the people of Mordecai, who were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus. That's a lot. It said from India to Ethiopia. It's a lot of area. In the first month, that is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast the pur, that is the lot, in the presence of Haman, from day to day and month to month, up to the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. And then, so now it's 12 years. So we're 9 years after the beginning of the story, and Esther Hadassah has been queen now for 5 years, and so now they're tossing the dice to decide. Let's decide what day we will kill them. And so it just kind of ran. We're going to kill them all. We're going to kill every one of them. He doesn't want to just. This is kind of the way that the rage of the enemy works. It wants to destroy everything connected to God, everything that would reflect, that would be considered a child of God. That is his aim. And so here you see Haman isn't. It's not enough for him to just destroy Mordecai. He wants to destroy anything that would not bow to him. So if the reason he doesn't bow to me is because he's Jewish, well, we can do away with that problem. I don't want to repeat this problem over and over. I want everyone to bow to me, so I'll kill anyone who doesn't. And so while Mordecai is in exile, and he's teaching his niece to operate within the area where they have been placed, right? At the same time, he will not bow before the king. He will not violate what he feels is obedience to the Lord in this case. And so you see that, that's the other thing when we look in the book of Daniel. They are respectful to King Nebuchadnezzar in the book of Daniel, but they don't bow. They don't bow before the idol. They don't back away from declaring or speaking forth with respect. When we looked in 1 Peter, it says, be ready to give an answer for the hope that is in you. And the way that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego speak to King Nebuchadnezzar is with deference, is with respect. They're not going kicking down his door. He's brought them to him. So you have the same, Mordecai is simply not bowing. He's not being, he's not thumbing his nose. He's not doing anything disrespectful. He's just refusing to bow. And that's, when the kingdoms of this world, when we don't bow to the kingdoms of this world, even when we're not trying to dismantle them violently, they react to us failing to bow to them. And yet we have to continue to walk out faithfully in the land of exile. So, anyway, it's decided that we see in verse 13, skip ahead. Dispatches were sent by couriers into the king's provinces, stating to destroy, slay, and annihilate all the Jews, from the youth to the elderly, both little children and women, on a single day, the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, and to plunder their possessions. So that's the plan. Is he's going to kill them all, from the youngest to the oldest, and take everything they've got. Which was that is what you see in the physical is a reflection of what's happening in the invisible. That the plan of the enemy is to annihilate God's people and to take their inheritance, to take what is theirs. And you see it played out over and over in every culture when you're talking about not just anti-Semitism, but just going against God's people, but anti-Semitism in every culture. It has happened, and you see, again, Hitler doing the same kind of thing, obviously to a degree that was 6 million of our people, and plundering their possessions, which are still still in captivity. Many of the possessions, they've been stolen and have not been recovered, have not been restored. There's not been restitution for all that was taken and all that was lost. So, go to chapter 4. The end of chapter 3 says the city was in confusion. Like what was going on, there was chaos. When Mordecai learned all that was done, I've got to go quickly. He tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went into the middle of the city, crying out in a loud, bitter voice. He went only as far as the king's gate, because no one could enter the king's gate clothed in sackcloth. In each and every province where the king's edict and law came, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing. Many put on sackcloth and ashes. So Esther finds out about it. And you have now this exchange. She's really upset. She's really, what's going on here? She doesn't know what's happening. And so there's messaging that goes back and forth. And skip ahead to verse 10. Then Esther spoke to Hathach and gave him instructions for Mordecai. All the king's servants and the people of the provinces fully understand that for anyone, man or woman, who approaches the king in the inner courtyard without being summoned, he has one law, that he be put to death, unless the king extends his golden scepter, permitting him to live. But I have not been summoned to come to the king for 30 days. So they conveyed Esther's words to Mordecai, because Mordecai's like, you need to talk to the king. She's like, I can't. If he doesn't call for me, I can't go. Mordecai told them, so this is their text messaging, right? I mean, this is not face-to-face conversation. Mordecai told them to reply to Esther with this answer: don't think in your soul that you will escape in the king's household more than all the Jews. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. Who knows whether you have attained royal status for such a time as this? And so, obviously, this is the passage we all know so well, that Mordecai says, now he's saying, okay, and time to speak up. I've told you to stay silent, but now it's time. And there comes a moment, there comes a point where, in obedience, there has been a silence, but there comes a time where you have to speak forth, and you may lose. You have to be willing to lose, is what I mean. God won't lose, and we see that, but you have to be ready to risk it. And he basically says, look, if you think that you're going to escape because you keep quiet, you're wrong. God's going to accomplish his purposes one way or the other. Do you think you're here for, like you're not just here because you're beautiful. There were lots of pretty girls. You're here, perhaps you're in this place, you're in the king's palace exactly for this purpose, exactly for such a time as this. There are times that we can sit here and we can grieve over, there have been times that I thought, I wish I lived in another time. I wish I lived when this wasn't happening or when that was happening. But the Lord has put you and I right here, right now, for such a time as this. And there come points where we have to be willing to speak forth his word, his truth, at the risk of losing all. That we don't bow to the kingdoms of this world. But there come moments where in obedience, we have to step forth. We have to lift our voices and speak up. And it doesn't mean, again, what we see as you go through the story is she's not obnoxious about it. She's not defiant. They fast and they pray. So while it doesn't mention the name of God, we see God at work, and we see them looking to God, and God is alluded to. The fact that he's saying, you're here, you're not here by accident. He's alluding to the things that seem coincidental are the hand of God, and God and the Jewish people, God's people, will be saved another way, if not through you. You can either get in line with God's purposes, and let him use you and risk yourself, or you're going to perish, and God will go through. His purposes won't perish. All right. So Esther sent this reply, text message back to him. Go, gather together all the Jews who are in Shushan and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will fast in the same way. Afterwards, I will go into the king, even though it is not according to the law. So, if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai left and did all that Esther commanded him. On the 3rd day, Esther put on her royal apparel and stood in the inner court of the palace in front of the king's hall. So she made herself visible. She put herself there. And the king was sitting on the royal throne in the hall facing the entrance. And when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the courtyard, she found favor in his eyes. So the king held out to Esther the golden scepter in the hand, and Esther approached and touched the top of the scepter. And then said the king to her, "What is it, Queen Esther? Whatever you request, even as much as half the kingdom, it'll be given to you." So she doesn't just spill her guts at this point. There's a wisdom that occurs. In the next area that we look at in 1 Peter, one of the things that Peter says, which we'll see Monday morning, is he says, hey, the end of all things is approaching. It says, so be of sound mind and be sober in prayer. There's a soundness, there's a wisdom that's at work. There's a focus in prayer. And so Esther's been fasting and has been praying, and they have been fasting and praying. And on that 3rd day, she's there, and he sees her. And it's not coincidental, though it may seem, that he lays eyes on her. And he extends the golden scepter, and he says, hey, what do you want? Anything you want, up to half the kingdom. And she says, you know what I'd like? I just want to have a banquet. Can I serve you? Can I give you a banquet? And let's let Haman come to the banquet as well. So Haman thinks he's big stuff. He thinks, man, this is going to be great. I'm gonna be elevated. And so we skip to chapter 5, verse 9. Haman went out that day happy and in good spirits. On his way out, he's happy, he's in good spirits. But however, he saw Mordecai at the king's gate, and he did not arise or tremble before him. And Haman was filled with rage against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home. He sent for his friends and his wife Zeresh, and he boasted to them about his vast wealth and many sons, and how the king had promoted him and exalted him. And so they're talking. What are they going to do? And then he's talking about how upset that he is. And his wife says, you know what, you shouldn't be treated this way. And so they come up with the plan to build a gallows. Skip ahead to verse 14. Then Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends said to him, let them set up a gallows 50 cubits high, and in the morning ask the king to have Mordecai hanged on it. Then go happily with the king to the banquet. The idea delighted Haman, and he ordered the gallows to be built. Remember the passage we looked at, and this is what you know the way the story goes, but when we looked coming through 1 Peter here, and it says to basically to walk in the character of Yeshua. And to this you were called. But one of the things that we looked at was it basically said yesterday that we're all going to have to stand before the judgment of God. And there's a trust in God's justice, though sometimes we can't see it, sometimes we don't feel like we experience it in the short term. But what we see here is a picture of what you reap, you sow. Though it looks bad, right? It looks bad for Mordecai. It looks, as far as Haman thinks, everything's turning up roses, turning up daisies, however you say it. Everything's turning up great, and it's looking good. But the very thing that he's setting up to destroy one another, the righteous, will be the cause of his own destruction, will be the source of his own destruction. So the king honors in chapter 6. That night, sleep abandoned, deserted the king. So he couldn't sleep. So he says, you know what? Somebody, I can't sleep tonight. Just happened to be, he couldn't sleep. The night before the banquet. And he says, go get the history books. Go get the book of the Chronicles. Just read that to me. Maybe that'll help me fall asleep. Just so happens that when they are reading the book of the Chronicles, they happen to read about when Mordecai uncovered the plot to kill him. Just so happens, just by coincidence, on that night, he can't sleep. On that night, the books are ordered, and it's opened on that night into that place in the book that remembers Mordecai. And he says, hey, what's been done? Was anything ever done for him? And no, nothing was done for him. He totally slipped. And there's this idea, I've walked in righteousness. Well, how come I haven't seen the results? Yeshua says, seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and he'll take care of the rest of things. He'll take care. Don't seek after your own honor. Mordecai wasn't seeking his own honor. He wasn't walking around bitter because he hadn't been properly promoted or praised for doing the right thing. So he's like, has anything been done? But he doesn't know what he should do. So Haman's walking through, and he says, hey, come here. Just so happens Haman is by. Just so happens. He said, what do you think should be done for somebody that the king really wants to honor? What do you think should be done? Haman thinks he's talking about him. Well, here's what I think. I think you should, put him on a horse, and, really dress him up and march him around town, basically singing his praises, saying, this is what the king does for the man that he wants to honor. It says, verse, where are we here? Go to verse 9. Let the robe and the horse be placed onto the hand of one of the king's most noble princes. Let them clothe the man whom the king desires to honor and parade him on horseback through the city streets, proclaiming, this is what is done for a man the king desires to honor. Then the king said to Haman, go quickly. Take the robe and the horse just as you suggested. For Mordecai, the Jew who sits at the king's gate, do not neglect anything that you recommended. So the very thing that he thinks he's going to exalt himself with is the righteous are exalted. And it's just this beautiful twist, this turn that shows God is at work, though his name is not mentioned. So Haman does it. And he's marching him around. I mean, you talk about a bitter taste in his mouth. Okay, so then he goes to the second banquet, because the queen, at the end of the first, he said, what do you want? And she said, I just want another banquet, and have Haman come. So now it's the second banquet. And we go into chapter 7. So verse 3. So the king says, he says, whatever you want, up to half the kingdom. Verse 3. So Queen Esther answered, if I found favor in the eyes of the king, if it pleases the king, grant me my life. This is my petition. I just want to live. And spare the life of my people. That's my request. For we have been sold, I and my people, for destruction, slaughter, and annihilation. If we had simply been sold as male and female slaves, I would have remained silent, for such distress would not be worth disturbing the king. King Ahasuerus responded to Queen Esther, who is he? Who is the man that presumed to do this? Esther replied, the man, the adversary, and foe is this wicked Haman. Right? This, and he uses the word the adversary, the enemy. It's this wicked Haman. Then Haman was terrified before the king and queen. Enraged, the king got up from the banquet of wine and withdrew to the palace garden. So Haman stays back and he's pleading. He's basically falling at the feet of Esther. And then the king comes back and is like, oh, you did this and now you're also going to try and violate my wife, my queen? You're done. And so it ends here. Excuse me. Verse 9. Harbana, one of the eunuchs attending the king, said, look, a gallows 50 cubits high is standing next to Haman's house. Haman himself made it for Mordecai, who spoke good on behalf of the king. And the king said, hang him on it. So they hanged him on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's rage subsided. And the issue happens that the king says, the problem is the laws of the Medes and the Persians can't just be revoked. So he couldn't revoke it. So what he did is put another proclamation that called all the Jewish people to stand up and to fight against the enemy, against those who would seek to take them, against those who had conspired against them. And so that's what happens. And they struck down all their enemies with the sword. And so all of Haman's sons are hanged at the gallows, and the righteous are exalted, and the Lord is victorious, though his name is never mentioned. In the midst of exile, we have to wait. We have to trust that the Lord is at work. We have to walk in the midst of where we've been planted. We have to walk in obedience to the Lord. We need to walk in wisdom, to walk and to be sober-minded, to walk and to be self-controlled, to not give them anything that they can actually, any evil that they can actually lay at our feet. Only that we obey the Lord. Only that we obey the Lord. That in the midst of the world in which we live, that we need to walk as he walked. That's what he's called us to. And that God's promises always come through. The question is, are we going to be a part of the fulfillment of those promises? Are we going to walk in obedience to him? Are we going to walk in his ways? Because God has put us here where he's put us. Look, it requires courage. To walk in obedience requires courage. We have to be in a place where we say, I'm willing to, like Esther, if I perish, I perish. If I lose everything for the sake of obedience to the Lord, I will lose everything. I'm willing to lay it all down. I'm willing to lay down the comforts of being where I am, the seeming safety of my present situation. Esther had this safe situation, to be willing to lay that down, to defend, to fight for righteousness, to not just to defend those who are in our midst, who are the mistreated. The Jewish people here were the mistreated people. They were on the edges of society. They were facing annihilation. And Esther had to be willing to lose her comfort, to lose her life for the love of her people, and for the love of and for her to get in line with God's purposes. That God was going to accomplish his purposes, and he will accomplish his purposes. Just, are we going to be a part of it? All right. Well, so one of the things that we do is we make, like Dayspring mentioned, make Hamantaschen, which are little Haman's hats that you wear, and then you eat his hat, and they're delicious because they're filled with fruit filling. All right, so let me say hello to anybody that I missed this morning. All right. Good morning to Ron and to Amy. Good morning, you guys. I think I said good morning to you already. I just see the Sonia and Margarita. Good morning to you. Good morning to Ruti. Hag Sameach. Hag Purim Sameach. Good morning to Charlene in Texas. All right, let me look a little bit more here. John and Jan, good morning, you guys. Hag Sameach. And I said good morning to Pat and Lori. Let me pop over here. Good morning to Phyllis. Good morning to you, Phyllis. And good morning to Tina. And good morning to the Eddies. And to Lauren and Levi and Valor and Haven and Everett and to Carol. I hope you guys are doing well. All right. Well, again, Hag Sameach, Shabbat Shalom. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Shalom, shalom. Have a beautiful day.
Find myself right here, right now. Who am I to try to save these lives some way, somehow? Can it be that you chose me, a girl who no one knew?
For such a time as this, for such a time as this.